By training, she is a political scientist. Wow, that's a big title. And has pursued parallel career as a political analyst. I don't want to tell you what the distinction between the two is, for the simple reason is I don't know. She commenced her career as a research associate at the International Institute of Strategic Studies in London. Went on to become a contributing editor of the Defense and Foreign Affairs Handbook, Defense and Foreign Affairs Strategic Policy, funny to note. Subsequently, she was head of global risks for leading strategic risk consultancy in the UK, where she specialized in advising Lloyd's of London syndicates, especially insurance underwriters, on political risks, war and terrorism risks, as well as being senior advisor to some major Austrian and German companies. Normally when countries want to deal with countries, they look at the political risk, the commercial risk also before they go in for the business risk. That much I know. She has authored several books on Zoroastrian community and holds a doctorate from the London School of Economics and International Relations. Jesus Christ, who is she? She is also the recipient of several international awards. She will address the subject of entrepreneurial social conscience as a means of Zoroastrian self-preservation. I think this is a logical sequel to the panel discussion that we've had almost, Dr. Shroff. She hopes that her talk will highlight Parsi entrepreneurs who have acquired wealth. Please donate kindly. Will consider it their duty to reinvest a part of it in the community, even in Bangalore. In her own words, this was the genesis of the understanding Parsi infrastructure that exists in this day today. The challenge for today's Zoroastrian entrepreneurs is to assess our current situation and make decisions tailored to our times. Ladies and gentlemen, with all these heavy titles, they charge her excess baggage when she's flying. I would like to present to you none other than Dr. Rashna Writer.
You make me sound like a Bollywood star. So what? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your very kind welcome. And I want to congratulate Bangalore, a new young chapter in the history of the WZCC. And I hope that it is just the beginning of many, many more chapters to be added, not just in India, but throughout the world. You're very, very kind, very, very kind. Very, very few of those accolades really apply. I will get on to business, but I will say, first of all, as you've heard, I am not an entrepreneur. I have spent my life in another environment. I grew up in Calcutta. My family, we are almost honorary Bengalis. I love my hometown, though I keep coming back to Bangalore because my family is settled here. When I was a young girl growing up in Calcutta, many of the things that were said really ring true. If you come from Bombay, they recognize you. I could tell you so many stories. Even growing up in Calcutta, people had not, many people had not heard of a Parsi. So it was always troubling to me. Who are we? Because all that our elders said to us was, the Arabs came to Iran, we came to India. I wanted to know, why do we speak Gujarati? Etc., etc., etc. It was really, it had to become an intellectual quest. You have to know yourself. I'm a great believer in that, which is why after I'd finished my PhD in London and when I was working and when my young nephew Khushro was born, I felt that as his fooey, I had a moral duty to try and learn for myself who we are, so hopefully I could pass it on to him. So this is the genesis of this sidetrack that I took to studying about my people. To study about our people, the story begins in Iran, but I will not go there. I will try and be very, very specific. on the brief that I have been given, okay? So bear with me. Zoroastrian theology encourages the creation of material wealth with accompanying social obligations to put it to good use. Social conscience is fundamental in Zarathustra's teachings and continues to be reiterated throughout the centuries. I will not labor the teachings of Zarathustra as we find them in the Gathas, because that is not what we are here to do. But I will say this, that long centuries after the prophet had lived and taught, long after the rise and fall of the great Persian Empire, and just to reiterate, if we date it from Cyrus the Persian, 550 BCE, short interregnum of Alexander of Macedon, until the Arab final conquest, 642 AD, almost 1,000 years of imperial rule, the theological underpinnings of Zarathustra's teachings continued to be transmitted both in oral and written form. And there are way too many references for me to quote today. So what I have done is I've chosen just one for you. And I'm quoting from the Pahlavi Rivayat accompanying the Dadistani Denig. And this gives us a flavor of how a businessman must conduct himself. Chapter 42, verse 2, quote, "When a trader buys for 4 drachmas a single piece of clothing, which is worth 4 drachmas in one town, he takes it to another town, and in the place where he takes it, it is worth 10 drachmas. He sells it for 10 drachmas and takes out of it wages and daily sustenance for himself and his horse, and he gives away what remains of it as a righteous gift. It is a work of great merit." Same chapter 42, verse 4. "The question for him who requires the wealth for a good livelihood. It is permitted to acquire up to 300 drachmas for good livelihood. If the profit which comes to him is more than that amount, let him give what remains, apart from his own expenses, as a righteous gift." End quote. So this suggests that Zoroastrian thinkers, now the Dadistani Denig is a 9th century Pahlavi text. We had a very short flowering of Pahlavi literature, 9th century, so this is written after the Arab invasion, okay? And the very term Dadistani Denig means religious judgments, okay? So this suggests that our thinkers wrote on theories of commerce, which gave due weight in human interactions. Furthermore, they took account of the profit motive, even as it emphasized the centrality of the righteous gift as social obligation. So now, let us look at this in practice, which brings us fast forward in time to India. There is a dynamism implicit in Zoroastrianism's economic ethics that helps explain the extensive welfare system established by the affluent members of the Parsi community in India. So the small number of wealthy Zoroastrians would have rationalized that they were under a moral obligation to utilize a part of their wealth for the benefit of their peoples, since the community's very small size meant that collective dependence on the largesse of the local authorities, the local government, would have been futile. We were not going to be dependent on any Indian authority or the British government. This is self-help. In the early centuries of their residence in Gujarat, the Parsis were in the main agriculturalists and artisans, grateful for the refuge granted to them to continue the practice of their faith, a primary reason for their flight from Iran. The arrival of the British in India would open yet another chapter in the community story. The establishment and expansion of British power in Western India led a growing number of Parsis to benefit from the new economic power, resulting in the acquisition of political dominance by some. By the first half of the 19th century, Parsi economic influence was tangible in two areas. First, almost all trade between Europe and India, insofar as it passed through Bombay, went through Parsi hands. Here, they acted as shipping agents, brokers, providing storage facilities, auction facilities, and they were thus the chief economic mediators between Europeans and the Indian hinterland. Second, direct trade with Europe remained inaccessible to them. This was controlled by the British. So the Parsis developed a primary position for themselves in trade with the Far East, gaining an early monopoly in opium exports. Now that is the questionable part of our story. Okay. Indeed, the Parsi aristocracy of prominent families, Jijibais, Banajis, Redimanis, Dadisets, Kamas, built their fortunes on the Far Eastern trade. Even the Tata family, pioneer industrialists in India and on the Asian continent, now globally, initially traded with China prior to Jamshedji Tata's establishment of his iron and steel works in India. The Parsis were canny enough to use to the fullest the several commercial opportunities that opened up in British India. Thus, the statistics are incredible. The achievements are truly phenomenal. I don't have the time or the space. I've picked out a few. By the early 19th century, the Parsis had become the foremost economic figures in Bombay. In 1805, they owned more companies in that city. Parsis owned 18 companies. Hindus owned 15 companies. The Europeans owned 9 companies. In 1795-96, they owned more than half the tonnage of European-captained Indian ships putting into Bombay, while their size still remained tiny. Only 10,000 Parsis inhabited the island of Bombay at that time. The significance of the elevation of the Parsi mercantile power was the fact that, while British rule had created the climate in which the Parsis flourished, the British had not yet begun to make their fortunes in Bombay at the end of the 18th century. They were making their fortunes in my hometown, Calcutta. The Parsis had become the predominant economic power of the island prior to the British. Indeed, it was from this base in Bombay that they would go on to increase their wealth. Now, while this tells us a great deal of the innate dynamism of the community, what is equally significant, and maybe you are not fully aware of this, the seed capital for early industrial enterprises was raised entirely by relatives of their founders acting as guarantors for these enterprises. Middle-class Parsis volunteered to buy shares in Parsi firms, confirming the strong family and community awareness of the Parsis that had ensured the community's economic prosperity. Having established businesses that would go on to become thriving enterprises, families, again, like the Jijibais, Tatas, Kamas, Masinas, Changirs, Petits, all founded charitable institutions. What is less well known? Again, there are many, many illustrations of this. I've chosen one. It's a very little known fact. We're talking about our generosity, our kindness. Parsi donations to the Muslim Khilafat movement of the early 1920s were proportionally higher than from the Muslims themselves. Professor Hinnels, who I've worked with for many years, Hinnels in one of his books writes, and I quote, "Benevolence is a fundamental Zoroastrian virtue and has characterized the community wherever it has been, in Iran, in India, or the diaspora," end quote. The establishment of the Bombay Parsi Panchayat in 1728 would come to institutionalize the socio-economic underpinnings, the infrastructure of the community. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a political scientist. I am a great believer in constitutions, infrastructure. I could go on and on and on and on and bore you on it. It is my favorite subject. But you cannot understand why we are sitting here today. It's because of the infrastructure that was put in place for us. Don't underestimate it. Thus, bags were built, gambars organized, dakhmas maintained, the soul ceremonies for the poor were funded, the sick, the destitute, widows, orphans were taken care of by the community. Don't worry, not a problem. In short, those better off were prepared to underwrite the establishment of community infrastructure. Why? The altruistic motive operated as a strategic backdrop to the hard-headed objective of reinforcing community identity, while community self-preservation would have been among the major considerations of the founding fathers of Parsi benevolence. Now, we've spoken about India. I now want to go to Iran. Equally indicative of the Parsi mindset at the height of financial power was that they were prepared to place their wealth at the service of their Iranian kinsmen suffering under repressive Muslim regimes. The establishment in 1854 of the Society for the Amelioration of the Condition of the Zoroastrians in Persia, which is shortened, often referred to as the Amelioration Society. The sterling work of the first and most outstanding Parsi emissary, Manikji Limji Hataria, opened yet another chapter with those better off within the community. We are all Zoroastrians. Doesn't matter if you're from India, Iran, North America, we are all Zoroastrians. Those better off in the community coming to the aid of their less fortunate brethren. Now, when Manikji reported back to Bombay, he was sent there. One of his first tasks was, Bombay said, tell us how many Zoroastrians there are in Iran. First thing he reported back, 1854. The Zoroastrian population in Iran was little more than 7,158. Shocking. All the laws of arithmetic are against you. Yazd and environs, few in Yazd and environs, Kerman, Tehran, Shiraz. The Amelioration Society funds were immediately put to use, repairing Atash Behrams, Adarans, Dakhmas. Zoroastrians had been denied education. But in 1857, Zoroastrian schools for both boys and girls were established. Hataria challenged at the highest level of government the abduction of Zoroastrian girls, who were then forcibly converted and married to Muslim men and thus lost forever to their families. Upwards of 100 orphan girls were given in marriage to Zoroastrian men, with the society in Bombay bearing the expenditure. Manikji is immortalized in modern Zoroastrian history as the prime instigator for the removal of the hated jizya, or poll tax. Now, this proved to be no easy undertaking. This is how it worked. The Parsis continued to press their case to Tehran through the good offices of the British government. Okay? What we loosely call the Parsi aristocracy had business ties with the British establishment in India. And they were not shy to use this to petition Tehran via London to continuously emphasize the great suffering of the Zoroastrians in Iran. The negotiations for the lifting of the jizya lasted from 1857. This is a date we should all remember. On the 27th of September, 1882, a royal firman decreeing the immediate abolition of the jizya was received by the Amelioration Society in Bombay. Gradually, Zoroastrians began to move away from agricultural and menial work, and the case of Jamshid Baman Jamshidian testifies to the commercial acumen inherent in the community. Jamshid was a native of Tehran, who managed to acquire close contacts at the Qajar court. In this era, you had the Qajar dynasty ruling the country, which allowed Jamshid to obtain the main contract to supply the Qajar army with provisions, a monopoly that led to financial prosperity. So, commencing his career as a contractor, he went on to become the most prominent banker in Iran. The government would pay for the provisions in installments through the collection of taxes, and these promissory notes were lodged with Jamshid, who became, in effect, the banker to the government of Iran. Now, someone said the other day, you know, things were easier in the old days when we... No, I disagree. Our ancestors faced huge challenges. Jamshid becoming banker to the Qajar government was almost miraculous. Why? Because the two controlling powers in Iran at the time were Russia and Britain. The Qajar Shahs had basically mortgaged their country to foreigners. And you have a Zoroastrian who has reached these heights. Do not underestimate this achievement. In his vast commercial enterprises, Jamshid employed between 150 and 200 Zoroastrians. Now, one of Jamshid's employees was Kehkashan Shah Rukh. I have written with Kehkashan Shah Rukh's grandson who passed away, the memoirs of Kehkashan Shah Rukh, another work that is well worth reading. Now, Kehkashan Shah Rukh was Jamshid Jan's secretary. He was arguably the most influential Zoroastrian of his time. If you ask me who are the two main Zoroastrians who in a global hall of fame we should put up, I would say Kehkashan Shah Rukh from Iran and Dadabhai Naoroji from India. Men of stature that someone like myself can't even comprehend. Okay, he began as a confidant of the Qajar Shahs. He was an advisor to the founder of the Pahlavi dynasty, Reza Khan Pahlavi. Now, this Renaissance man represented his community in the Majlis. He was a social reformer who challenged deeply held prejudices against the Zoroastrian minority. He petitioned the Parsis of India, as well as the Iranian authorities, to help alleviate his people's suffering, while simultaneously holding various national portfolios. He was head of the audit department of the Majlis. He played a central role in the introduction of a modern telephone system in Tehran. He was closely involved with grain distribution during the famine of 1917-18, even as he advised Reza Khan Pahlavi on the establishment of the Reserve Bank of Iran. What I haven't mentioned here, and I've just remembered, is it was Kehkashan Shah Rukh who influenced the Shah to introduce the Zoroastrian calendar names. So even today, after the Islamic Revolution, it is still Ormuz, Bahman, Ardibesh, Saravar, etc., all because of Kehkashan's influence at that highest level. Kehkashan Shah Rukh, better known as a parliamentarian and advisor to the Shahs, was also a businessman who employed Zoroastrians in his organization, Sherkat Zartushtiyan, which provided electricity to northern Iran. So now let's go forward. I have outlined some recent and historical cases of entrepreneurial social conscience that has enabled diminished Zoroastrian peoples in both India and Iran survive and thrive. We can agree that there is a long tradition of self-help within the community. We can go further and say that this demonstrates the continuation of an established practice that is embedded in Zoroastrian ethos. We were discussing that this morning. I have taken the time to outline the history of the community's tradition of self-help because I believe strongly that historical knowledge helps us manage our affairs. The skills acquired from studying the past can provide a useful foundation for navigating the present and preparing for the future, and that is where we should turn our attention now. The needs of yesterday are somewhat different from the needs of today. That's an absolute truism. We must first and foremost take into account that whereas previously the Zoroastrians lived primarily in Iran and India, today we are spread across the globe. Now, this has injected new imperative. The nature and composition of our community has changed. By moving to foreign lands, we acquire over time, are distinct new national identities. Don't let anyone fool you into thinking that a British Zoroastrian is identical to an American or an Australian Zoroastrian. We come to reflect our acquired nationalities, which in turn impacts on the Zoroastrians of that particular country. Nevertheless, overall, given that the Zoroastrian diaspora is concentrated mainly in Western nations, a certain underlying similarity may be assumed, for now at least. What is important to factor into our calculations, however, is the difference between 18th, 19th century British India, Iran under the Safavid and then the Qajar dynasties, and the impact of these political environments on the respective Zoroastrian communities. Thus, our elders created the networks and the infrastructures demanded by the times they lived in. Overall, the Zoroastrians now domiciled in the West belong to the educated, affluent middle class. We are essentially an urban middle class people. Here in our audience today, I'm sure that we have established entrepreneurs, young professionals. We've heard of them yesterday, this morning, and others. You are here today because you are keen to participate in the conversations we need to outline the future of our people. And I am presuming that you are prepared to contribute towards that future. If I may be so bold, I would like to suggest where today's entrepreneurs might financially assist the community. I referred earlier to the relatives of the founders of the Parsi enterprises acting as guarantors during British India when the community was anxious to take advantage of the opportunities on offer. There is great talent in our small community, but in the world of business, talent often needs to be helped along with financial assistance. Now, I know I am repeating what was said yesterday afternoon, and I'm very glad that I sat in on that discussion. The importance of entrepreneurs to the world at large is not just that they have an idea that can transform lives, but that they take the financial risk to bring that idea to market. It can happen that the lack of finance stymies the advance of a would-be prospective business. If we were to create a global Zoroastrian Entrepreneurs Fund, it could help nurture current and future talent. So the genesis of this idea, as we know, is already on the table. We've heard of it, spoken of it yesterday, and you'll have really started the good work there. WZCC Finance Initiative, the concept of a partnership between WZOT and WZCC. I was put right just at the coffee break. To start by giving small interest-free loans to entrepreneurs is, I think, a superb idea that you should start it with all speed. And I wish you got speed on that. Okay. A part of such future wealth would, I hope, in turn, be placed at the service of the community. This is quite important. The wealth creation initiative could help us plan for the Zoroastrian world's future needs. In the United Kingdom, where I have lived most of my life, I know we live in France now, but I can speak for the UK, they've started a huge fundraising enterprise to build, if you like, what you might call an old people's home. It's the reality of demographics. You live in essentially a new world. UK, America, Canada, these are new to us. Let us not forget that. We grow old, you need help, so they are working on this. It's a very ambitious project, but to build somewhere, and London property prices are hugely expensive, but I think they would aim to get it somewhere in London, but it is a worthy concept, a worthy idea, the thought of dreaming, and then your dreams coming true. And I think this might need to be replications in our new diaspora settings. Not to say that you might need it in India as well. So we create wealth. We Zoroastrians create wealth. We do well with it. But I would love to think that we go forward with this brilliant history that we have behind us, that we don't only think of it for ourselves, but reinvest some back into the community. Then we can say that we have done what our forebears, the example they set us. Okay. Equally, we acknowledge that we are what Professor Jamshid Choksi, I've used Jamshid's phrase very often, he refers to us as a most minuscule minority. Jamshid's words. We are a most minuscule minority, we accept that. Nurturing our entrepreneurial flair, married to the community's tradition of a social conscience, could help carve out contemporary Zoroastrian's place in the world. We may think our glory days are behind us, but with judicious planning, strategic thinking, and placing our financial muscle at the service of Zoroastrians globally, we can yet again remind the world of who we are. Professor Eckhard Kulke, the German sociologist, refers to us as the dynamic economic ethics of our community, married to our social conscience. And he says, this is Kulke saying, it makes us almost unique in the world. Succeeding in business, I don't believe, is an end in itself. Rather, to some extent, it is a means to achieving a better world. So, this could be our lodestar for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rashna. Very eloquently spoken. Emphasized at the right points at the right time. I shall throw this session open for a QA session. If you have any questions of Rashna. Can you get her paper?
About this, we will PDF it. I'll forward it to Zareen, and then she can distribute it to those who are interested. Yes. And in fact, yeah, that's fine. There is a longer paper of this, but this will suffice. Thanks.
It's 500 pounds each. Any other questions? There are two aspects. Either you've understood it totally, so you have no questions, or not at all. So any questions, comments? Yes, sir, Rustam. Yeah, your mic is coming. Yeah, just behind you.
Thank you.
Yes, Rustam's an old friend.
That's right.
That means you go easy on her.
Thank you. We have, as you have known, we have pretty good two projects underway in Houston. And one of them is an Atish Kadeh that is already almost ready in the next few months. Wow. And maybe in June or July, it might be shaping up, finalizing it. And same way we have in the works a retirement community project that is also, but nothing has been established except for some imaginary lines on the paper. But other than that, it's there, and things are happening the same way. People who have made accumulated wealth are no different today than they were before. They're still giving away, and when we have our awards time, you will see one of them at least here. Thank you.
I'm really glad to hear that the Agyari program in Houston, because when we were there in 2015, it was just about, and we saw the plans and all of that, which was fantastic. And the retirement community. So you see, we are already planning for the future. We know that we don't need bags because that has been done. Possibly, I stand to be corrected. But yes, now the changed demographics has put a new objective for us to achieve.
Yes, sir. Identify yourself, sir.
Okay.
Even a mic apo?
Homi Gandhi from Fazana, Los Angeles. Fazana has 26 member associations and 14 corresponding groups. We run with an administration of 26 committees which look after various aspects, including infrastructure. There are 14 centers, or there are 14 associations which are associated actually with the centers around North America. And each of the center is trying to build or having a nearby Atish Kadeh. We have two Atish Kadehs in Los Angeles area already. and there's a third word coming up. So people are very much interested in continuing with our traditions and values. So I'm very proud that the second generation, the second diaspora in North America is continuing the process. Thank you.
Yes, Fali?
Fali Major. Rashna, you mentioned about an old age home somewhere in the UK. Here in Bangalore, now I'm speaking with a different hat on my head. I'm the president of the Bangalore Parsi Anjuman. And a lady who passed away many years back was very kind enough to give us a piece of land to build with a specific mandate to build an old age home. We are also in the process of looking for funds and how to go about doing it. We have the land with us. We have a few options and plans, and your brother, who's our treasurer, had made some excellent financial options on about 3-4 of them, and we are working on it. So we are also in the process of bringing up structures like that, but for a small community like ours, we find it very difficult to fund it. So I would appeal to everyone here, if in some way or the other this funding is done, because probably we won't have that many old people in Bangalore to live in that house, but we intend throwing it open for the whole country, from wherever, who can come and stay here. Thank you.
If it helps you to increase your donation, I endorse what Fali said. One more question. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, Rashna. Thank you for a very interesting presentation, Cyrus Daba. Having lived in 2 cities within India and in 2 countries outside of India, I couldn't agree with you more when you said that there are national identities that probably define our, Zarathustrianism or Zoroastrianism. Does it then mean that a national identity would blur the lines of what could be a common definition of Zoroastrianism across the world? Or is there something like a common definition of Zoroastrianism? When I speak to my Zarathustri friends, or when I lived with them and worked with them and interacted with them, say in Australia or in Sweden, my notion of Zoroastrianism was put to the test. Yes. It was quite different to what I was used to, having come in from India. So do we have some kind of a universal definition of Zoroastrianism, or has it been lost?
You actually go to the heart of truly our modern challenge. I spoke, I think I spoke in Houston on being recognizable Zoroastrians. And do I have a few minutes just to give you a bit of background? I'll give you an example. I believe that India has played a colossal role in the entire history of Zoroastrianism. The reason for that is simple. You may or may not be aware that there were more Iranians, i.e. Zoroastrians, even pre-conquest in China, settled there. Some estimates put them at about 1 million. I cannot verify that, but there were huge numbers. Okay. Settled there, but in 864 AD, there were Zoroastrians, there were Christians, there were Hindus doing business there. The Chinese government proscribed all foreign religions. After that, we do not really hear of Zoroastrians in China. Now, move to India. We know post-conquest, and this is controversial, the exact date, because the Qisseh Sanjan can be interpreted in certain ways. What was the exact date of our arrival? We arrived from Khorasan, the Qissah tells us, but we survived in India. I have written on why precisely we survived. I will not go into that. The fact that we were allowed to remain recognizably Zoroastrians. This is why we use the term Parsi. The term Parsi should not be offensive to any Zoroastrian from Iran. The term Parsi only means, i.e., a Zoroastrian in India, from India. You see, this was the sort of shorthand definition for who we are. In fact, if you talk to a lot of people, even in Bombay, you say, I'm a Zoroastrian, they may not understand. You say Parsi, they will understand. Yes, so long answer to your short question is, so we were recognizable as Parsis, this long domicile in India. The challenge going forward is precisely the diaspora. The challenge for us, I am not really concerned about our young. We are not going to be central bankwalas. Don't worry about that. They're too dynamic. Seriously. I'm not worried about finance. I'm not worried even about our integrity. Maybe it's in our DNA. We would hope so. Fair enough. I am concerned in the dilution of identity, which is why one of my pet subjects is infrastructure. I would guarantee, I come from Calcutta. When I was growing up, there was a small population, a floating population, 2,000, 2,500. Today, there are 600 Parsis, or thereabouts, in Cal. But we were always recognizable. Anywhere in the world I go, I will be a Zoroastrian. Why? The reason is simple, not because of anything particular I've done. We had the Parsi Club. We had Tuagyaris. We had on Papeti, we had our Nataks. We had our infrastructure. Of course, we had our families. When you begin, and America is extremely dynamic. This is no offense to the rest of the world, but a lot is happening in the United States. When you set up your fund, when our young entrepreneurs are doing well, when they themselves are reinvesting the money into the funds, let us now start thinking of ways and means, put our heads together. We've got all sorts of talent just in this room, so imagine in the entire diaspora. Put our heads together. How precisely are we going to work to reinforce our identity as Zoroastrians? Because that then, in part, will answer your question, but more importantly for me, it may begin to give us tangible hope for survival in the future. We do have a problem with numbers. Sometimes the laws of arithmetic look very, very problematic when we think about it. So that would be so keep thinking, but reinforce identity.
Thank you very much. I think, Rashna, you've done a yeoman service with this presentation of yours. And what makes her unique today is she says, I have no problem with finance. It's a very, very rare statement these days.
It will come because we've got
No, I'm talking about your personal finance. Okay.
Talk to my husband.
Do we have time for a couple of questions? We are already 15 to 16 minutes behind. But sir, yes. And one youngster there had raised his hand after him. And after that, we'll close it.
Hello, my name is Feroz Bandara, and I'm from the USA. In fact, I moved to the USA when I was 18 years old, and I have lived most of my adult life for the last 47 years in the USA, so I consider myself American.
Thanks for admitting your age, sir.
And originally I was from Pakistan, which is a different story about getting visas and all that. I won't go into that. But my comments to you is that in the USA, physical infrastructure is what we started with 25 years ago, and we are getting there, centers like Mr. Gandhi mentioned, and building now the next step is building the prayers. What's equally important is finding our own way on how we are going to organize basically our religion going forward. Okay, that may be a controversial topic in India, but we have to find our way moving forward. And on the subject of charity, we have been involved with the Banu Mantal in Karachi, and I didn't hear any mention of Karachi in this whole conference, but there are a lot of Zoroastrians there. And we have set up an old folks home. It has a kitchen, elevator, several beds, and it's been in operation for 3 years.
I spent a few days in Karachi when I was working on my first book. I did some field work in Karachi, and I was amazed at the infrastructure there. And you will find Karachi Parsis will have a very Parsi feeling about them. And again, I come back to it because of that. Yes, I was very impressed with Karachi.
One quick one, Yazid.
Or entrepreneurs, what are the two benefits that we can take from our ancestors and 2 things that we youngsters should not follow from our ancestors, as business or professionals.
We've got such a long history, you see, when you say ancestors. I go back to ancient Iran, you see. So yes, we've got a lot there. In passing today, and it is very, very true. I think in business, leadership potential is, you know, you can sense somebody who has a natural talent for it or has the makings of it and then can be nurtured. I think our people would have been great leaders if, considering that they conquered what was the world's first world empire. So you don't do that without leadership. So I would say leadership you should take with you. And it wasn't just Cyrus. We keep talking about Cyrus, you know. With a very, very, very few exceptions, our people, all the way down to us in India and in Iran, you talked of honesty, you talked of generosity, you talked of warmth. These you know, traits have been commented on by our enemies, the Greeks and the Romans. So I would say that leadership and value for human life. So they did actually show that. Now, what is it that they didn't show? I think we lost our empire through infighting. We lost our empire. You read the last 70 years, the Arabs almost got a walk-in. I won't labor that point. I always hang my head in shame, and when I have to tell students about that, you know, that's the difficult part. But it's true. We have to take the good and the bad. So, you know, we talk of Parsi politics, you know, it's almost a cliche and it's a phrase. But sometimes I feel very, very despondent when I read of certain things. So that is something that we should not take. That is something, in fact, we should stay away from. So that's what I'd say.
Yazid, what you should not do, what our ancestors did, you should not die. May I now request the second lady, Treaty Tantra, to kindly felicitate this wonderful person, Rashna Writer.